The water bucket slipped from Nora Thorne's blistered hands and clattered against the wooden frame of the well, sloshing half its contents onto the sun-baked earth before she could catch it. And she wanted to cry, but her tears had dried up 3 days ago along with everything else in her life. Yankton, Dakota Territory, 1876. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight, turning the air thick and hard to breathe. Nora stared at the dark patch of mud her carelessness had created, watching her precious water disappear into the thirsty ground. Behind her, the small soddy she'd called home for exactly 2 weeks sat like a stubborn brown lump against the endless prairie. Inside, her father lay on the only bed, his breathing shallow and rattling, getting worse by the hour. She'd come west with such hope. They both had. After her mother's death last winter in Ohio, her father had sold everything to start fresh, to build something new. The land office had promised fertile soil and opportunity. What they'd found was isolation, backbreaking work, and now this mysterious fever that had struck her father down just as they were getting started. Nora bent to retrieve the bucket, her back protesting. She was 22 years old and felt twice that. The rope was rough against her palms as she lowered the bucket again, listening to the distant splash. Her arms trembled as she hauled it back up. The well was deep, the bucket heavy, and she'd already made this trip 4 times today. Her father needed constant cooling, needed water for his medicine, needed her to keep him alive somehow. "Madam, that looks like quite a struggle." Nora startled so badly she nearly dropped the bucket again. She spun around to find a man on horseback, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. She raised her hand to shield her eyes, her heart hammering. Out here, a woman alone was vulnerable. Everyone knew the stories. "I'm managing," she said, trying to sound confident rather than terrified. The man dismounted, moving slowly, deliberately. As he stepped into the shade of the well's small roof, Nora got her first clear look at him. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle. His clothes were dusty but well-maintained, his hat worn but of good quality. Most striking was his face, angular and weathered, with eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most. "Name's Daniel Everett," he said, not coming any closer. "I work at the Double R Ranch about 6 miles north. Been riding fence line and saw your smoke this morning. Thought I'd check if everything was all right." "We're fine," Nora said automatically. Then, because she was tired and scared and the bucket was so heavy, she added, "My father's ill. I need to get this water back to him." Daniel nodded once. "Let me help." "I don't need," but he was already there, taking the bucket from her hands with such ease it made her want to weep. The relief in her shoulders was immediate and overwhelming. "Where to?" he asked simply. Nora hesitated for only a moment before leading him toward the soddy. What choice did she have? Besides, something in his steady gaze made her think he wasn't a threat. Or maybe she was just desperate enough to take the risk. Inside, the soddy was dim and close. Her father lay on the bed, his face flushed with fever, his breathing labored. Daniel set the bucket down carefully near the bedside, then stepped back, removing his hat. "How long has he been like this?" Daniel asked, his voice low. 3 days. It started with chills, then the fever came. I've been trying to cool him, get him to drink, but—" Nora dipped a cloth in the fresh water and laid it across her father's forehead. "There's no doctor in Yankton who'll come out this far for what we can pay." Daniel was quiet for a moment, studying her father's flushed face. "I've seen this before. 2 years back, half the ranch hands came down with something similar. River fever, the old-timers called it. Bad water, most likely." Nora's heart sank. "The well? Probably fine. More likely from drinking creek water before the well was finished." He paused. The men who had it, most of them pulled through. Took time and care, but they made it. Most of them. Nora heard the tremor in her own voice. The ones who had someone to look after them day and night, to keep the fever down and get fluids in them. Daniel met her eyes. "You've been doing this alone," she nodded. "For 3 days. Without sleep." "I've slept some," she lied. Daniel's expression softened slightly, and something in that small change made Nora's throat tighten. She couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her with anything like concern. "I need to get back to the well," she said abruptly, turning away. "He needs more water for tonight. I'll get it. You've already, madam." Daniel's voice was firm but not unkind. "You're dead on your feet. Let me fetch the water. It's no trouble." Pride warred with exhaustion. Exhaustion won. Nora nodded, sinking onto the stool beside her father's bed. She heard Daniel leave, heard his horse whicker softly outside, heard the creak of the well rope. When he returned with 2 full buckets, she could have kissed him. "That should see you through the night," Daniel said, setting them down. "I'll come by tomorrow, bring more if you need it. You don't have to do that." "I know." He moved toward the door, then paused. "My mother used to make a tea when we had fevers, willow bark and sage. I could bring some tomorrow if you'd like." Nora looked up at him, this stranger who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't had the energy to speak. "Why are you helping us?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "Because you need help, and because—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening slightly. "Because I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning and there's no one to throw you a rope." Before she could respond, he was gone, riding off into the late afternoon sun. Nora sat in the dimness, listening to her father's labored breathing, and felt something shift in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just the temporary relief of not being quite so alone. That night was long. Her father's fever spiked near midnight, and Nora worked frantically to cool him, changing compresses, trying to get him to sip water, praying in fragments that made no sense even to her. By dawn, the fever had broken slightly, and she dozed off sitting beside him, her head on the edge of the mattress. She woke to the sound of horse hooves. Morning light streamed through the single window, and she jerked upright, disoriented and aching. Her father was sleeping, his breathing easier than it had been. She stumbled outside to find Daniel tying his horse to the hitching post, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. "Brought the tea," he said, as if it were perfectly normal to show up at dawn at a stranger's homestead. "And some broth. Mrs. Chen at the ranch made extra. Said it might help." Nora blinked at him, trying to wake up fully. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. He had scars, small ones, on his hands and one across his chin. His eyes had the kind of distance in them that spoke of old pain, carefully controlled. But his hands were gentle as he pulled out a wrapped jar of broth and a small cloth bag of dried herbs. "I don't know how to thank you," Nora said. "No need." Daniel glanced toward the soddy. "How is he?" "Better, I think. The fever's down a bit." "That's good. That's real good." He handed her the bag. "Steep the tea strong, get him to drink as much as he can. The broth too, when he's able. You should eat something as well." "I will." Daniel nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Nora tried to remember. "I've been eating." "That wasn't my question." She felt a flash of irritation at being managed, but it died quickly under his steady gaze. "I've had other priorities. You can't care for him if you collapse." Daniel reached into his bag again and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Biscuits and bacon. Eat them. That's not a suggestion." Despite everything, Nora felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "You're very bossy for a stranger. My mother always said it was one of my worst qualities." Something flickered in his eyes, gone before she could identify it. "I'll fetch more water before I go." He made 3 trips to the well, filling every vessel Nora had. She stood in the doorway, eating the biscuits mechanically, watching him work. He moved with an easy efficiency, like a man accustomed to hard labor. When he finished, he watered his horse and then mounted up. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. "You don't have to keep coming. We'll manage." "I know, but I'll be back anyway." He tipped his hat to her. "Make him drink that tea, Miss Thorne, Nora Thorne, Miss Thorne." He said her name carefully, like he was committing it to memory. "Get some rest if you can." Then he was gone again, leaving Nora standing in the doorway with a bag of tea and a confusion of feelings she didn't have time to examine. She went back inside, made the tea as instructed, and spent the day coaxing her father to drink it. By evening, his fever was noticeably lower and he opened his eyes for the first time in days. "Nora." His voice was a rasp. "I'm here, Papa." She gripped his hand, tears finally coming. "I'm right here." "Where?" "Our homestead. You've been sick, but you're getting better." "You have to keep getting better." He squeezed her hand weakly and drifted back to sleep, but it was a natural sleep this time, not the frightening unconsciousness of before. Nora sat beside him and let herself cry, huge shaking sobs of relief and exhaustion and lingering fear. Daniel came back the next day and the day after that. Each time he brought something. More tea, more food, once a book he thought she might like. Each time he filled the water buckets without being asked and spoke to her with a gentle courtesy that made her chest ache. On the fourth day, her father was sitting up, taking broth on his own. On the fifth day, he was arguing with her about getting out of bed, which meant he was definitely recovering. On the sixth day, Daniel arrived to find Nora at the well herself, struggling with the bucket as usual. He dismounted quickly and came to help. "Here," he said, reaching for the rope. Their hands touched, and Nora felt something electric pass between them. Daniel must have felt it too because he went very still. For a moment they stood frozen, hands overlapping on the rough rope, the bucket suspended somewhere in the darkness below. "I've got it," Nora said softly, but she didn't pull away. "I know you do," Daniel replied just as softly. "But maybe you don't have to. Got it alone, I mean." She looked up at him, really looked at him. At the careful kindness in his eyes, the set of his shoulders like he was braced against something heavy. At the way he stood, always ready to help but never presuming, never pushing. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked. "And don't say it's just to help. There's something else." Daniel's hand tightened on the rope. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then slowly he began to pull the bucket up, hand over hand, his movements measured. When it reached the top, he lifted it clear and set it down. Only then did he answer. "I had a brother," he said, not looking at her. "Younger. His name was Michael. 5 years ago we were working our family's ranch in Missouri. Small operation, just us and our parents. That winter sickness went through. Same kind of fever your father had." He paused, his jaw working. "My brother got it bad. I was supposed to be watching him while my parents went to town for supplies. But I was 18 and stupid, and I left him alone to go into town myself. Wanted to see a girl I liked." Nora's breath caught. "When I got back, he was unconscious. Fever burning him up. I tried everything, but—" Daniel's voice roughened. "He died that night. My parents came back to find me sitting there with his body. They never said it was my fault, but I knew. "Daniel," Nora breathed. "After that, things fell apart. My parents couldn't look at me without seeing Michael. I couldn't look at myself without seeing him. When they decided to sell the ranch and move back east to Ohio to be near my mother's sister, I told them I was staying. Been working ranches ever since, moving around. Can't seem to settle anywhere." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw and old. "When I saw you struggling with that bucket, saw you trying so hard to save your father all alone, I couldn't ride past. Couldn't let someone else die because I did nothing." Nora understood then, with perfect clarity. Daniel wasn't just helping her. He was trying to atone for a sin that had never really been his to begin with. She reached out and touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "You were young and you couldn't have known." "Maybe." His voice was hollow. "But that doesn't make him any less dead." "No, but it doesn't make you responsible either." She kept her hand on his arm, willing him to hear her. "And Daniel, because of you my father is alive. You did that. You saved him." He shook his head. "You saved him. You were the one there day and night. Because you gave me the help I needed to keep going. Because you brought the tea and the food and the water." Nora stepped closer. "Don't you see? You already threw me the rope. You already pulled us out." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. It was small and unpracticed, like he was out of the habit, but it transformed his face. "You're stubborn," he said. "That's rich coming from you. I mean it. Most people would have accepted a simple "you're welcome" days ago. Most people wouldn't have kept coming back to help strangers for no reason." Nora realized her hand was still on his arm and that she didn't want to move it. "Stay for supper. My father's been wanting to thank you properly." Daniel hesitated, and she could see him preparing to decline to keep his careful distance. So she added, "Please, I'd like the company, and I make a decent stew when I have the ingredients." "I brought salt pork and potatoes," he admitted. "In the saddle bag, was going to leave them." "Then it's settled. Come on." She picked up the water bucket herself before he could, carrying it toward the soddy. After a moment she heard him following, leading his horse. Her father was sitting in the chair by the small table, looking thin but alert. He brightened when he saw Daniel. "Mr. Everett," he said, his voice still weak but genuine. "Nora told me what you've been doing for us. I owe you more than I can repay." Daniel looked uncomfortable. "No debt, sir, just being neighborly." "Neighborly is bringing by a casserole, not saving a man's life." Nora's father, Thomas Thorne, gestured to the other chair. "Sit, please. My daughter says you're staying for supper, and I won't hear any arguments." So Daniel stayed. Nora made stew with the supplies he'd brought, and they ate together as the sun set, painting the prairie gold and orange. The conversation was slow at first, careful, but gradually warmed. Thomas told stories about Ohio, about Nora's mother, about their hopes for the homestead. Daniel spoke less, but when he did, it was thoughtful, considered. Nora watched them talk and felt something settle in her chest. This, she thought. This was what she'd been missing. Not just help with the water or the worry, but this. Connection. Company. Someone to share the burden. After supper, Daniel helped clear the plates, insisting despite her protests. As they worked side by side in the small space, their shoulders brushed, and Nora felt that same electric awareness from earlier. When she glanced up, Daniel was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you for staying," she said quietly. "Thank you for asking." He dried the last plate and set it carefully on the shelf. "I should head back. It's getting dark." "Will you come again?" The question came out before she could stop it, too eager, too revealing, but Daniel didn't seem to mind. "If you'd like me to, I would. We would. Papa still needs to regain his strength and the work around here." She trailed off. "Yes, please come again. Tomorrow, then." That small, unpracticed smile again. "I'll bring eggs. Mrs. Chen has chickens and they're laying well." After he left, Nora stood in the doorway and watched until his silhouette disappeared into the gathering darkness. Behind her, her father chuckled softly. "That's a good man," Thomas said. "Yes," Nora agreed, her heart beating faster than it should. "A man with a lot of pain in him, though." "I can see it." "Yes," Nora said again, softer this time. "Be careful with him, Nora, and with yourself." She turned to look at her father. "What do you mean?" Thomas smiled gently. "I mean that I see how you look at him, and I see how he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching. Just Be careful. Hearts are fragile things, especially wounded ones. Nora wanted to protest, to say it wasn't like that they barely knew each other. But she couldn't make the words come because they would have been lies. Instead, she just nodded and helped her father back to bed, her mind full of storm-gray eyes and careful kindness. Daniel came back the next day, and the next, and the next. It became a rhythm, as natural as breathing. He'd arrive in the morning, help with the water, often bringing supplies or news from town. Sometimes he'd stay for a meal. Sometimes he'd help with repairs around the homestead, fixing the door that hung crooked or reinforcing the corral fence. Thomas was getting stronger, but slowly, and Daniel's help made the difference between survival and thriving. But more than the physical help, it was the companionship that mattered. Daniel and Nora would talk while they worked, sharing stories, trading observations about the land and the weather. She learned that he could read and write well, that he'd had a good education before everything fell apart, that he loved horses and understood them in a way that seemed almost magical, that he had a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter. He learned that she'd wanted to be a teacher back in Ohio, that she loved reading but hadn't had a new book in months, that she was stronger than she looked and stubborn as a mule when challenged, that her laugh was a rare and precious thing, and making it happen became a secret goal of his. 3 weeks after they met, Daniel arrived to find Nora trying to move a fallen beam that had broken off the sodi's roof during a night storm. She was straining against it, her face red with effort and getting nowhere. "Wait," Daniel said, swinging down from his horse. "You'll hurt yourself." "It needs to be moved," Nora panted, not stopping. "Then we'll move it together." He positioned himself beside her. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. They lifted together and the beam shifted, then rose. Daniel took most of the weight and they walked it clear of the building and set it down. Nora straightened, pressing her hand to her lower back. "Thank you," she said. "I've been trying all morning." "Why didn't you wait? I would have helped." "Because I can't just wait for you to fix everything, Daniel. This is my homestead, my responsibility," he frowned. "I never said it wasn't." "No, but you keep showing up and doing things and bringing things, and She trailed off, frustrated. "I need to be able to manage on my own." "Why?" The question was blunt. "What do you mean, why? Because that's life. Because you can't always be here. Because I need to know I can do this." Daniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Is that what you think? That I'm here because I think you're incapable, aren't you?" "No." He stepped closer. "I'm here because I want to be, because helping you, being with you it." He stopped, searching for words. "It makes me feel less like a ghost. Like maybe I'm not just going through the motions anymore. You asked me why I keep coming back, and I said it was about atonement, and that was true, at first. But now..." "Now," Nora's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Now it's because when I'm here with you, I feel like myself again. Like the person I used to be before I lost everything. You make me remember what it's like to look forward to tomorrow." He reached out, then stopped himself, his hand falling. "But if you don't want me here, if I'm overstepping, I'll stop coming. I don't want to be a burden." "A burden?" Nora laughed, and it came out slightly wild. "Daniel, you've been the opposite of a burden. You've been..." She took a breath, steadying herself. "You've been the best part of my days. When I wake up, I wonder if you'll come by. When I'm working, I think of things I want to tell you. And when you leave, the world feels a little bit dimmer until the next time I see you." They stood there in the morning sun, the admission hanging between them like something fragile and new. Daniel's expression shifted, walls coming down, and what she saw beneath took her breath away. Longing, hope, fear. "Nora," he said, and her name in his voice was a prayer. "I'm scared," she admitted. "My mother died, then Papa got sick, and everything's been so hard. I don't know if I can handle one more thing going wrong. I'm scared too, Daniel said. I haven't let myself care about anyone in 5 years. It's easier that way, safer. But then you came along, stubborn and brave and beautiful, and I can't seem to help myself. I'm not beautiful. I'm covered in dust and my dress is held together with patches. You're beautiful, he said firmly. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. What are we doing, Daniel? I don't know, but I'd like to figure it out if you're willing. She thought about her father's warning, about fragile hearts and carefulness. But she also thought about the past 3 weeks, about the quiet joy of companionship, about the way her heart lifted every time she heard horse hooves approaching, about the fact that life was uncertain and short, and sometimes you had to reach for happiness even when you were scared. I'm willing, she said. Daniel's smile was bright and genuine, transforming his face. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his fingers gentle as they laced with hers. Then we'll figure it out together, he said. They stood there, hands clasped, while the prairie wind whispered around them and the endless sky stretched overhead. It wasn't a kiss, wasn't even a formal declaration, but Nora felt the significance of the moment deep in her bones. This was a beginning, fragile and hopeful and real. From that day forward, things shifted between them. Daniel still came every day, but now there was an openness to their interactions, an acknowledgement of what was growing between them. He'd take her hand while they walked to the well. She'd touch his shoulder when she passed him. They'd catch each other's eyes across the room and smile, sharing private jokes and unspoken understanding. Thomas watched them with a mix of amusement and approval, saying nothing but missing nothing. His strength returned gradually, and by the 5th week, he was able to do light work around the homestead again. But even as he recovered, Daniel kept coming. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Daniel told Nora more about his brother. About the games they'd played as children, the dreams Michael had harbored, the guilt that had eaten at Daniel every day since his death. I keep thinking about all the things he'll never do, Daniel said quietly. He wanted to be a veterinarian. He was always good with animals, gentle and patient. He would have been wonderful at it. He sounds like he was a lot like you, Nora said. Daniel shook his head. Michael was better than me, kinder, smarter, more patient. Everyone loved him. I think you're wrong. I think you see yourself through the lens of your guilt, and it distorts everything. Nora took his hand. The Daniel I know is kind and patient. He shows up every day to help people who started as strangers. He's gentle with my father and respectful with me. He works hard and never complains. That's not the picture of a bad person. But Michael died, and that's a tragedy. But it wasn't your fault, Daniel. You were a boy who made a mistake. You didn't cause the fever. You didn't choose for him to get sick. You were just living your life. And you can't stop living your life now to punish yourself for that. Daniel's throat worked. I don't know how to let it go. Maybe you don't have to let it go completely. Maybe you just have to learn to carry it differently. She squeezed his hand. You've been carrying it alone, letting it crush you. But what if you shared the weight? Let someone help you bear it. Who would want to help with that? Me, Nora said simply. I would. You've been helping me carry my burdens. Let me help carry yours. He looked at her with such raw emotion that she felt her breath catch. Then, slowly, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. How did I find you? He whispered. I think we found each other, Nora replied. Right when we both needed it most. The summer rolled on, hot and endless. Daniel was increasingly absent from the ranch, spending more time at the Thorne homestead than anywhere else. Finally, his boss, a gruff man named Robert Richardson, rode out to investigate. Nora was alone when he arrived, Thomas having gone to check the fence line. She came out to greet him, wiping her hands on her apron, immediately nervous. Richardson was a big man, weathered and stern, and she had no idea what he thought of Daniel's frequent absences. "Miss Thorne," he said, tipping his hat. "Mr. Richardson, can I help you with something? Looking for Daniel. He around?" "Not at the moment. He was here earlier but went into town for supplies." Richardson nodded slowly, his sharp eyes taking in the improvements around the homestead, the repaired roof, the new chicken coop Daniel had built last week. "He's been spending a lot of time out here." Nora lifted her chin. "He's been very helpful. My father was ill, and Daniel's assistance has been invaluable, I'm sure." Richardson's expression was unreadable. "Thing is, I pay him to work my ranch, not to play handyman for the neighbors." Nora felt her temper flare. "If you're concerned about his work ethic, I can assure you that Daniel never comes here until his duties for you are complete. He's been nothing but responsible," and Richardson held up a hand, and to her surprise, he was almost smiling. "Easy, miss. I'm not here to criticize. Truth is, Daniel's one of the best workers I've ever had, always has been. Does the work of two men and never complains, but he's also been sad, I guess you'd say, distant, like he was just going through the motions." He paused. "Past few weeks, though, he's been different, lighter. Actually smiles sometimes, and I figure that has something to do with you." Nora felt her cheeks heat. Like I said, I'm not here to criticize. I'm here because I wanted to meet the woman who managed to bring Daniel Everett back to life." Richardson's expression softened. "He's a good man, Miss Thorne. Been through a lot, carries more guilt than any person should. But he's good and he deserves some happiness. You treat him right, you hear?" "I will," Nora said, her voice thick. "I promise." "Good. And for what it's worth, if you two decide to make things official, there's a foreman position opening up at my ranch in the fall. Comes with a small house and better pay. I'd be happy to offer it to Daniel if he's interested in putting down roots around here." After Richardson left, Nora stood in the yard, her mind spinning. A foreman position. A house. Putting down roots. It was all moving so fast, and yet it felt right in a way that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. When Daniel returned that evening, she told him about Richardson's visit. He listened carefully, his expression growing more thoughtful as she spoke. "A foreman position," he repeated, "with a house. He said you deserve happiness," Nora said, "and I agree with him." Daniel set down the supplies he'd brought and turned to her. "Nora, if I took that position, if I put down roots here, it would be because of you. Because I can't imagine being anywhere you're not, but I need to know. Is this what you want? Am I what you want?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "You're exactly what I want, even with all my baggage. All my ghosts, especially with them. Because they made you who you are, and who you are is someone I—" She paused, gathering courage. "Someone I love." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and true. Daniel stared at her, his eyes wide with wonder. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you, Daniel Everett. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you show up every day, the way you helped save my father, the way you carry water without being asked. I love your broken pieces and your healing ones. I love all of you." Daniel closed the distance between them in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you too. God, Nora, I love you so much it terrifies me. I didn't think I'd ever feel this again, ever want to. But you've given me a reason to hope, to believe in tomorrow. You've helped me carry the weight I thought I'd hold alone forever." Then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Nora melted into him, her arms winding around his neck, and for a moment the whole world was just the two of them, the prairie wind and the endless sky. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Nora laughed, giddy with joy. "That was very sudden. I've been thinking about it for weeks. I just didn't know if I had the right to ask." His hands were gentle on her face. "I don't have much to offer yet. But if Richardson's serious about that foreman position, I could give you a real home. We could build a life together, you and me and your father if he's willing. I could help with this homestead, make it into something good. We could have a future." "Yes," Nora said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you. I don't need you to have everything figured out. I just need you." Daniel kissed her again, deeper this time, and Nora felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When Thomas returned an hour later, he found them sitting close together on the step, holding hands and making plans, and his smile was bright enough to rival the sun. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in Yankton's small church. It was a simple affair, just a handful of people. Thomas, some of the ranch hands from the Double R, Mrs. Chen, who'd made a beautiful cake, and Richardson, who gave Nora away since Thomas was still not quite steady on his feet. Nora wore a simple white dress she'd made herself, and Daniel wore his best shirt and a new vest he'd bought specially for the occasion. As they stood before the minister and said their vows, Nora thought about the day they'd met. About the water bucket she couldn't carry, the fear and exhaustion she'd felt, the desperation. And she thought about how Daniel had appeared like an answer to a prayer, how he'd helped her carry more than just water, how he'd helped her carry hope. And as she looked into his eyes and promised to love him forever, she knew he was thinking something similar. Because she could see it in his face, the way the old pain had eased, the way the guilt sat lighter on his shoulders. She hadn't erased his past, hadn't magically fixed everything. But she'd helped him carry the weight he'd held alone for so long, and that had made all the difference. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Daniel did, to the cheers and applause of their small gathering, and Nora had never felt so happy in her entire life. They moved into the foreman's house at the Double R a week later. It was small but sturdy, with a real wood floor and glass windows. Thomas stayed at the homestead, now strong enough to manage on his own, though Daniel rode out to help him regularly. The arrangement worked well. Thomas had his independence, and the young couple had their privacy. Nora quickly made the house into a home. She hung curtains, planted a small garden, and filled the shelves with books Daniel bought her whenever he went to town. She also started teaching, offering lessons to the ranch workers' children twice a week. It wasn't a formal school, but it was a start, and it made her feel like she was contributing something beyond just keeping house. Daniel thrived in the foreman position. He was a natural leader, fair and firm, and the men respected him. Richardson had chosen well. The ranch prospered under Daniel's management, and with it, Daniel himself seemed to blossom. The haunted look faded from his eyes, replaced by contentment and purpose. But the ghosts didn't disappear entirely. Some nights, Daniel would wake from nightmares, gasping and shaking. Nora learned to recognize the signs, to wake with him and hold him until the terror passed. She'd stroke his hair and whisper reassurances, reminding him that he was here, that he was safe, that Michael's death wasn't his fault. "I still see him sometimes," Daniel admitted one night, his voice raw. "In my dreams, he's always small, always sick, always looking at me like he's asking why I left." "What do you tell him?" Nora asked softly. "That I'm sorry, that I'd change it if I could." He paused. "But lately I've been telling him something else too. I've been telling him about you. About how you saved me in a way. And in the dreams where I can do that, where I can talk to him, he always smiles, like he's happy for me." Nora's eyes filled with tears. I think he'd want you to be happy." "Maybe," Daniel pulled her closer. "I'd like to think so." Their first year of marriage was one of adjustment and growth. They learned each other's rhythms, quirks, and needs. They had disagreements, of course. Nora tended to be impulsive and Daniel overly cautious, which led to friction. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise and communicate. And beneath it all was a bedrock of love and respect that made everything else manageable. In the spring of their second year together, Nora realized she was pregnant. She told Daniel one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, terror, and finally pure joy. "A baby," he said, his voice choked. "We're having a baby. Yes, are you happy?" "Happy." "Nora, I'm terrified and thrilled and about a dozen other things I don't have words for." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "I'm going to be a father." "You're going to be a wonderful father," Nora said firmly. But as the pregnancy progressed, she could see Daniel's anxiety growing. He became almost obsessively protective, worrying about every little thing. One night, she finally confronted him about it. "You're thinking about Michael," she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you or the baby or both? What if I fail again?" "Daniel, listen to me." Nora took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You're not that 18-year-old boy anymore. You're a grown man who's learned and changed and grown, and you're not alone. We're in this together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. But what if? No what ifs. We can't live our lives in fear of everything that might go wrong. We have to trust that we're strong enough to handle whatever comes." She softened her voice. "I know you're scared, I'm scared too. But I also know that we can do this, together." Daniel pulled her close, his arms tight around her. "Together," he repeated like a vow. The baby came in early December, a healthy boy with dark hair and a strong set of lungs. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Daniel thought he might lose his mind from fear. But Nora was strong, and Mrs. Chen, who attended as midwife, was experienced and calm. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Daniel held him with shaking hands and wept. "He's beautiful," he whispered. "He's perfect." "He is," Nora agreed, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name him?" Daniel looked down at his son, this tiny miracle, and thought of his brother. Of Michael, who'd never gotten to grow up, who'd never gotten to experience any of this. And he knew with sudden certainty what the name should be. "Michael," he said, "if that's all right with you. I want to give him my brother's name, not to replace him or to try to fix the past, but to honor his memory, to let him be part of our future in a good way." Nora smiled, tears in her eyes. "Michael Everett, it's perfect." As Daniel held his son and watched his wife sleep, he felt something shift inside him. The guilt that had weighed on him for so long didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became something he could live with, something that was part of him but didn't define him. Because this baby, this new Michael, represented hope and possibility. Represented the future instead of the past. And Daniel silently promised both Michaels, the one he'd lost and the one he held, that he would be the best father he could be. That he would love this child fiercely and teach him to be kind and never take a single moment for granted. Life settled into a new rhythm. Nora recovered from the birth, and they adjusted to the chaos of having an infant. Daniel was a devoted father, getting up for night feedings and changing diapers without complaint. He'd rock Michael for hours, singing old songs his mother had taught him, telling stories about the ranch and the prairie. Thomas visited often, delighting in his grandson. He'd sold the homestead to a young couple from Kansas and moved into Yankton, where he ran a small feed store. The work was easier on his aging body, and he seemed content. But he came out to the ranch at least once a week to visit, bringing gifts for the baby and tall tales for anyone who'd listen. When Michael was 6 months old, they had a gathering at the ranch to celebrate. All their friends came. Richardson and his wife, Mrs. Chen and her family, the ranch hands, Thomas, even some of Nora's students and their parents. They ate and laughed and watched the baby crawl around in the grass, grabbing at everything within reach. At one point, Nora found Daniel standing apart from the crowd, watching the scene with an expression of wonder. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "I'm thinking about how different my life is from what I thought it would be," he said. 5 years ago, I was certain I'd always be alone, that I didn't deserve anything else, and now I have you and Michael and all of this." He gestured to the gathering. "I have a family, a real family." "You deserve it," Nora said fiercely. "You deserve all of this and more." Daniel turned to her, his eyes bright. "You know what the best part is? I'm starting to believe that, because of you, you helped me see that I could forgive myself, that I could move forward. You helped me carry the weight until I was strong enough to set it down." "We carried it together," Nora corrected. "That's what marriage is, what love is, carrying things together." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, while their friends cheered in the background. And Nora thought about that first day at the well, about the water she couldn't carry alone, about the stranger who'd stopped to help, about how that simple act of kindness had changed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The years rolled by, marked by growth and change. Michael grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses as much as his father did. 2 years after his birth, Nora had a daughter they named Rose after Daniel's mother. And 3 years after that, another son they called James after Nora's father, Thomas. The little house that had seemed so spacious when they'd first moved in became cramped with 3 children. So Daniel built an addition, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He did most of the work himself, with help from the ranch hands and Thomas, who insisted he was still spry enough to swing a hammer. Nora's teaching expanded as well. She convinced Richardson to let her convert an old storage building into a proper schoolhouse, and soon she had 15 students, ranging from 6 to 14. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, and loved every minute of it. Daniel would often stop by during her lessons, leaning in the doorway and watching her work with such obvious pride that the children would tease them both. Thomas lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren passing away peacefully in his sleep when Michael was 10, Rose was 8, and James was 5. It was a sad time, but also a peaceful one. He'd had a good life, had seen his daughter happy and settled, had known his grandchildren. At the funeral, Nora spoke about how her father had been brave enough to start over, to come west and build something new, and how that bravery had given her the life she now had. "He taught me to be strong," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "To face challenges head-on and never give up, and those lessons have shaped everything I've become. I hope I can pass that same strength on to my children." Daniel squeezed her hand throughout the service, his support steady and sure. And that night, as they lay in bed, he held her while she cried and reminded her of all the good memories, all the love her father had given and received. "He was proud of you," Daniel said. "He told me once that you were the bravest person he'd ever known." "He said that," Nora sniffled. "Many times. He said it took courage to come west, but even more courage to build a life here, to make something good out of hardship." Daniel kissed her forehead. "He was right. You are brave and strong, and I'm so grateful I get to spend my life with you." As the children grew, Daniel made sure to tell them about both of their ancestors. About the first Michael, the uncle they'd never met but whose name the eldest carried. He told them stories of Michael's kindness, his way with animals, his dreams of being a veterinarian. And he explained in age-appropriate ways about the guilt he'd carried and how their mother had helped him heal. People make mistakes, he told them one evening as they sat around the fire. Even big ones. And sometimes those mistakes have consequences we can't fix. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to be good people. It doesn't mean we give up. We learn, we grow, and we try to do better. And we let the people who love us help carry the hard things. Young Michael, who was 14 now and looked so much like his father it sometimes made Daniel's heart ache, nodded seriously. Like how Mama helped you. Exactly like that. I was carrying something so heavy I could barely stand, and your Mama didn't take it away because that's not possible. But she helped me carry it, made it lighter until I was strong enough to bear it myself. He looked at his children, these 3 miracles. That's what family does. That's what love is. Rose, 12 and sharp as a tack, tilted her head. Do you still feel guilty about Uncle Michael? Daniel considered the question carefully. Sometimes, probably always a little bit, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to. Now it's more like a reminder to be grateful, to not waste the life I have, to make sure I'm present for the people I love. Good, said James, who was 9 and had no patience for sadness, because we'd miss you if you weren't present. Daniel laughed and pulled his youngest son into a hug. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. As the children grew into young adults, Daniel and Nora watched with pride and occasional terror. Michael announced at 16 that he wanted to be a veterinarian, just like his namesake uncle had dreamed of being. Daniel helped him apply to a veterinary college in Kansas City, and when he was accepted, they had a huge celebration. He'd be so proud, Nora said that night, curled against Daniel in their bed. Your brother. He'd be so proud that Michael is following his dream. I hope so, Daniel said. I like to think he's watching somehow, that he knows his name lives on, that his dream didn't die with him. Rose wanted to be a teacher like her mother, and she started helping with the school as soon as she was old enough, showing a natural gift for working with children. James was still figuring out his path, but he loved the ranch and the land, and Daniel suspected he'd stay close to home. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Nora with a trip to the spot where they'd first met, where he'd first helped her carry water from the well. The old homestead had changed hands several times over the years, but the current owners were friends who didn't mind them visiting. They stood by the well, now fitted with a proper pump, and Daniel took Nora's hand. 20 years ago, I stopped here because I saw smoke from your fire and wanted to check if you were all right, he said. It was the best decision I ever made. 20 years ago, I was so desperate and scared that I didn't even think twice about accepting help from a stranger, Nora replied. And that stranger became my whole world. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package. I got you something. It's not much, but... Nora unwrapped it to find a delicate silver bracelet. Engraved on the inside were the words, "We carry it together." Her eyes filled with tears. Daniel, it's beautiful. You once told me that I didn't have to carry my burdens alone, that you'd help me, and you did. You have. Every single day for 20 years, you've helped me be better, lighter, happier. He fastened the bracelet around her wrist. This is just a reminder of that promise. That whatever comes, we face it together. Nora kissed him, long and deep there beside the well where it had all started. Together, she agreed. Always together. They stood there for a while, watching the sun set over the prairie, the same endless expanse they'd been watching for 2 decades. So much had changed, and yet the fundamentals remained the same. They had each other. They had their love. They had their family. As they rode back to the ranch, Nora thought about the journey they'd taken. About the scared, exhausted woman she'd been, struggling with a water bucket she couldn't carry. About the broken, guilt-ridden man who'd stopped to help. About how they'd saved each other in ways neither could have anticipated. Life hadn't been easy. There had been struggles, losses, challenges. But there had also been joy, growth, and love. So much love. And as they arrived home to find their children waiting for them, Michael home from college for the anniversary, Rose having prepared a special dinner, James having decorated the whole house with wildflowers, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single thing. Daniel caught her eye across the room and smiled, that same unpracticed smile she'd first seen 2 decades ago, now comfortable and frequent. And in that smile, she saw everything they'd built together, all the weight they'd shared, all the burdens that had become lighter through carrying them as one. That night, after the children had gone to bed and they were alone in their room, Daniel held Nora close. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For letting me help you carry water all those years ago, for helping me carry the weight I'd held alone, for loving me despite all my broken pieces, for giving me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning with gratitude instead of guilt." He kissed her forehead. "For being you." Nora's heart swelled. "You know what's funny? I was going to thank you for the exact same things. We really did save each other, didn't we? We really did." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the way they had been for 20 years, and would be for however many more they were blessed with. Outside, the prairie wind sang its eternal song, and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the vastness of it all, 2 souls that had found each other against all odds continued to build their life, one day at a time, one burden shared, one moment of love after another. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Michael graduated from veterinary school and returned to Dakota Territory, setting up practice in Yankton. He married a lovely woman named Sarah, a banker's daughter with a sharp mind and kind heart, and they gave Daniel and Nora their first grandchildren, twin boys they named Thomas and William. Rose did indeed become a teacher, taking over the school from her mother when Nora decided it was time to retire. She had a gift for reaching difficult students, for seeing potential where others saw problems. She never married, claiming she was too busy and too happy with her life to add a husband to the mix, and neither Daniel nor Nora pushed her. Some people were meant for partnership, and some for independence, and both were equally valid. James stayed at the ranch, just as Daniel had predicted. He became foreman when Richardson's son took over the ranch, and Daniel stepped back from daily management. James brought new ideas and energy to the operation, modernizing where it made sense while respecting tradition. He married late, at 32, to a widow named Margaret who had 2 children from her first marriage. James loved those children as if they were his own, and soon they had 2 more together, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. Daniel and Nora aged together, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing but their love deepening with every passing year. They moved into a smaller house on the ranch property when James and Margaret needed more room, and they spent their days in gentle retirement, tending a garden, reading and spoiling their grandchildren. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on the porch and watch the sunset, hands clasped, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of companionship. "You ever regret it?" Daniel asked one such evening when they were both in their 60s. "Coming west, everything that happened?" Nora looked at him in surprise. "Not for a moment. Why would I? It was hard. Your father got sick, we struggled, you worked so hard, and through it all I found you. I built a life I love. I raised 3 incredible children, and now I get to enjoy my grandchildren. I got to teach and make a difference in young lives. I got to grow old with my best friend." She squeezed his hand. "No, Daniel, I don't regret any of it, do you?" "No," he said softly. "I just wanted to make sure you were happy, that I'd given you a good life. You've given me a wonderful life." Not a perfect one, because perfect doesn't exist, but a real one full of love and meaning. Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm happy, Daniel, truly, deeply happy, and I hope you are too. I am, he said and meant it. The guilt he'd carried for so long had finally transformed into something else entirely. Not gone, but integrated, a part of his story that made the rest of it more meaningful. He'd learned to forgive himself, or at least to accept that he'd been human and young and flawed, and that those things didn't make him unworthy of love and happiness. And he'd learned that the key to healing wasn't forgetting or pretending the pain had never existed. It was sharing it, letting someone else help you carry it until it became manageable. Nora had done that for him, and in helping her with her own burdens, he'd found purpose and redemption. They continued to live quietly and contentedly, watching their family grow and flourish. They were there when Michael's twins graduated from school, when Rose published a series of primers for teaching reading that became popular throughout the territory, when James's oldest stepdaughter got married in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Daniel's health began to fail when he was 71. Nothing dramatic, just the slow decline of a body that had worked hard for decades. His heart was weak, the doctor said, and there wasn't much to be done except rest and enjoy the time he had left. Nora nursed him with the same fierce dedication she'd shown her father all those years ago. She was with him constantly, reading to him, talking with him, helping him through the difficult days and celebrating the good ones. I'm not afraid, Daniel told her one afternoon as they sat together in the autumn sunshine. I've had a good life, a better one than I ever deserved or expected. You deserved every moment of happiness, Nora said firmly, though her eyes were wet. Maybe. But whether I deserved it or not, I got it. I got you and our children and years of peace and purpose. That's more than most people get. He took her hand, his grip weak but steady. When I'm gone, Daniel, when I'm gone, he continued gently, I don't want you to be alone. You're still strong, still vibrant. Don't shut yourself away. I could never love anyone the way I love you. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you not to stop living. Keep teaching if you want, keep reading, keep spending time with the grandchildren. Keep being the incredible woman you've always been. He smiled. You saved my life, Nora. You gave me a reason to live. I'm just asking you to keep living fully after I'm gone. Can you do that for me? Nora couldn't speak through her tears, but she nodded. Daniel passed away peacefully 3 weeks later, on a clear November morning. He was surrounded by family, his hand clasped in Nora's. His children and grandchildren gathered close. His last words were, I love you, directed at Nora, and then he slipped away as gently as a sigh. The funeral was huge. It seemed like half of Dakota Territory came to pay respects. Daniel had touched so many lives through his work, his kindness, his quiet integrity. Person after person stood to speak about him, about times he'd helped them, lessons he'd taught, the example he'd set. Michael spoke about his father's courage in choosing to honor the uncle he'd never met by giving him his name. My father taught me that we honor the dead not by dwelling in grief, but by living fully and loving fiercely. That's the legacy he's leaving us. Rose talked about her father's patience, how he'd taught her to see the potential in everyone, to never give up on people. He believed in second chances and fresh starts because he'd needed them himself, and he spent his life giving others the same grace he'd received. James simply said, My father was the best man I've ever known. He loved my mother with his whole heart, raised us to be good people, and showed us through his actions what it means to live with integrity. I hope to be half the man he was. Nora sat through it all, holding together through sheer force of will. But that night, alone in the house that suddenly felt too big and too empty, she finally let herself break. She sobbed into Daniel's pillow, which still smelled like him, and grieved for the man who'd been her partner, her love, her best friend for 46 years. But she'd made him a promise, and Nora Thorne Everett had never broken a promise in her life. So the next morning she got up. She got dressed, she made breakfast, and she kept living. It was hard at first. Everything reminded her of Daniel, but slowly she found her rhythm. She spent time with her children and grandchildren who rallied around her with love and support. She returned to teaching part-time, working with Rose at the school. She joined a ladies' reading group in town. She tended her garden and took long walks and let herself grieve while also letting herself heal. 2 years after Daniel's death, as Nora was tending the flowers on his grave, she heard a voice behind her. "Those are beautiful." She turned to find an older gentleman, well-dressed and kind-faced, holding his hat in his hands. "Thank you. They were his favorites. I'm sorry for your loss. I just moved to Yankton, so I've been visiting the cemetery to learn about the town's history. I couldn't help but notice the dates on the headstone. 46 years of marriage, that's remarkable." "It was," Nora agreed. "Are you settling here, trying to?" "I'm a writer, and I thought Dakota Territory would provide good material." He smiled self-deprecatingly. "Though I'm finding it harder than expected to break into a new community at my age." They talked for a few more minutes, and Nora learned his name was Henry, that he was a widower himself, that he had children back east. He was pleasant and respectful, and when he asked if he might call on her sometime, just for company and conversation, Nora surprised herself by saying yes. Henry became a good friend over the following months. They'd have tea and discuss books or take walks through town or attend church socials together. It was comfortable and easy, and while Nora never felt for Henry what she'd felt for Daniel, she appreciated his companionship. Her children, particularly Michael, were relieved to see her engaging with life again, to see her smile more freely. They understood she would never stop loving their father, but they were glad she'd found a way to be happy anyway. Nora lived to be 83 years old, bright and sharp until the very end. She passed away in her sleep, surrounded by the family that had been her greatest joy and proudest achievement. At her funeral, her children and grandchildren spoke of her strength, her wisdom, her unfailing love. They talked about how she'd built a life from nothing, how she'd helped their father heal from old wounds, how she'd taught them all what it meant to face hardship with grace and courage. They buried her next to Daniel, under the Dakota sky they'd both loved so much. On the headstone, beneath her name and dates, Michael had inscribed a simple phrase, "We carry it together." Years later, when Michael was an old man himself, he'd tell his own grandchildren the story of how their great-grandparents had met. About the water bucket and the well, about the broken cowboy and the determined woman, about how they'd saved each other and built something beautiful from their shared struggles. "The lesson," he'd say, "isn't that you need someone else to complete you. It's that we all carry burdens, and those burdens are lighter when we share them." Great-grandfather was drowning in guilt and grief until great-grandmother showed him he didn't have to carry it alone. And great-grandmother was exhausted and scared until great-grandfather appeared to help. They made each other stronger, and the children would listen, wide-eyed, to this tale of love and redemption, of the cowboy who helped carry water and the woman who helped him carry his pain. They'd learn about kindness and second chances, about forgiveness and grace, about the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, each adding their own chapter to the story. The school Rose had run became a proper schoolhouse, and then a small academy. The veterinary practice Michael had started grew into a clinic that served the whole region. And always, In family stories and local legend, people remembered Daniel and Nora Everett, the couple who'd found each other in the hardest of times and built a legacy of love that endured long after they were gone. The well where they'd first met was eventually capped and filled in when the homestead was modernized, but before they did, the family held a small ceremony there. They told the story one more time of that pivotal moment when two struggling souls had connected, had chosen to help each other, had begun the journey that would change both their lives forever. And as the sun set over the prairie that had witnessed their entire story, the family raised glasses of cool well water in a toast. "To Daniel and Nora," Michael said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air, "who taught us that strength isn't about bearing everything alone. It's about having the courage to accept help, to offer help, and to build something beautiful together. May we all be so lucky in love and so wise in living." "To Daniel and Nora," the family echoed and drank deeply. The prairie wind whispered around them, carrying away their words but not their meaning. And somewhere in the vast expanse of earth and sky, in the legacy of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the stories told and retold around dinner tables and fireplaces, Daniel and Nora's love lived on, as real and powerful as it had been that first day by the well, when a cowboy helped a woman carry water, and she helped him carry the weight he'd held alone.